welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing on with the coat and we are working on the back panel. Okay, so in the back panel of the coat, we are going to use, if you've been with me on this journey, you know about this horsehair canvas or tailor's canvas. We are going to use this to stabilize the back as well, even though we're not doing any shaping this time like we had to do with the collar and the lapel. The reason for that is we need the stability. Especially if you've gone and put all this lovely handwork into shaping your lapels and your collar, you need to make sure that your foundation of your garment is still really, really strong, because the entire garment is going to be hanging off of the shoulders, right? And for me, the coat that I've been making, I have to hang it on 2 hangers. It's so heavy, which with the Calgary winters, it's a thing I need. So we do need that extra stability. We need extra stability around the back of the arm side, the same way that we did at the front. And we also need extra stability at the top of the shoulder, because even though it's not cut truly on the bias, you still wind up with a bias cut seam here. So over time, as you're wearing this garment, if you don't really reinforce that seam, you can wind up with getting some slouching shoulders, that the seam gets pulled at, it gets saggy, and then your garment's not in the same shape that it used to be. So we're going to use the tailor's canvas to reinforce the back and the armscye and shoulder seams. We're also going to use some twill tape to further reinforce those seams. We're going to put it in shoulder pads and kind of just do the last of the sort of inner workings of this coat. All right, so I already have my interfacing pinned on and ready to go. You can see that I have my 2 sides of my interfacing are sewn together, and my seam allowances have been zigzagged down. And then I've just gone ahead and pinned my interfacing to the back panel of my garment. Now I'm going to just use a running stitch, again with those same shallow stitches that we've been using this whole time on this project. I'm just going through my interfacing and picking up the barest, like 1 or 2 threads of my fashion fabric, and I'm going to place my running stitch just on the outside of my seam allowance line. Okay, so you can see I have done my running stitch on both of my arm sides and the back of my collar opening, but I have left my shoulder seams. So I pinned my front and back panels together, and now I'm going to take some of my twill tape and I'm going to line this up with my shoulder seam, and I'm going to cut it just, I don't know, like 1/2 centimeter too short. Again, this is another one of those seams where we want this pulled taut a little bit. And you can see how when I'm pinning the edges, how it's kind of rolled up like that. Don't worry, this is not going to have like some kind of elasticated effect. I'm going to pull this taut as I pin it, and then once I get it all stitched in, all that extra tension is going to do is it's going to just add extra stability and strength to my shoulder seam. Now when I go and stitch the seam, I'm going to run my row of stitching through the twill tape, and that will sew my seam together and reinforce it at the same time. Okay, so my shoulder seams are sewn together now. Now what I need to do is I need to make sure that they're going to lay nice and flat, because that back seam still has the interfacing all the way through the seam. We did that for extra durability, plus the twill tape. So I'm going to open this up and I'm going to press that nice and flat. Okay, so I've done what I could with an iron, and I'm just going to trim up my edges just a little bit, make things a little bit tidy. I know, nobody's ever gonna see this, but you know what? I'm gonna know. So, once I get these all trimmed up, I'm going to use our good friend, the cross stitch, to flatten these seam allowances down to the garment. And this is just going to keep things from puckering up, especially after you have it laundered. This is a coat that I'm going to have to get dry cleaned, but still, I don't ever want these seam allowances to ever puff up again. So I'm going to use a cross stitch to keep them flattened down. So when I'm stitching this cross stitch, my bottom end of my cross is in my seam allowance right before my seam, and then the other side of my cross stitch is actually going past the edge of my seam allowance, and I'm stitching that down to the interfacing and into the fashion fabric of my coat. Oh, look how nice and flat that is. That is just going to sit beautifully. From now until the end of time, I will never have to worry about that. And you can really see how just ironing it, like it doesn't even come close. Okay, so my shoulder seams are done, my sleeves have been put in, it's time to pop in my shoulder pads now. Now I want the straight edge of my shoulder pad to actually go a little bit past my seam line there. Now in fast fashion garments that I've had, I've just had shoulder pads that had like 2 tacking points on them and that's all they had. But this book showed to actually run a really, really loose sort of ladder stitch in between your garment and your shoulder pad. So I'm going to give that a try. So I folded my shoulder pad in half and I'm just running a ladder stitch in between my shoulder seam allowance and my shoulder pad. This is a really loose stitch and I'm not even going all the way through the shoulder pad because I don't want to flatten the shoulder pad at all. I just want to sort of fix it in place. It's not something that is going to take a lot of friction, so it doesn't need to be held in very strongly. Once you put the lining in your coat, it will pretty much just stay wherever you put it without a whole lot of coaxing. So this is all the inner workings of the coat are done now. Everything that needs to be reinforced is reinforced. Everything that needs to be shaped is shaped. Everything is looking gorgeous. Now it's time to close everything up. And the next thing that I'm going to be showing you is the tailored buttonholes. I'm going to do hand tailored buttonholes with silk thread, and I think it's just going to be a nice little finish to this coat, and I'm really looking forward to it. So that's all I have for you this week. I hope I see you again next week. Until then, have a good one.